People always say to me, oh, I'm not a baker, I can't bake. It's not that it's difficult, it's just once you know kind of the basics of what's happening when you're baking, it makes the whole process easier. If you can carry on a few rules, they become second nature once you've done them a few times. Here's a few starter rules to get you going and give you a little bit more confidence when you're in the kitchen. Like, it's still really fun, even though you have to follow some rules. First things first, read the recipe through. I cannot express this enough. You just kind of want to know what you're getting yourself into when you're baking, and it'll make baking a much more enjoyable experience. Baking is more about controlling the variables in a recipe. You know, baking is all about ratios. Pound cake is going to be a little bit more on the dense side, whereas sponge cake has an entirely different ratio of fat, sugar, and flour. Baking's especially difficult because of the leaveners that are in there. The difference between baking soda and baking powder is that baking powder has baking soda in it, but it also has an acid that reacts to the baking soda and allows it to kind of bubble and rise. Baking soda needs acid and liquid in order to activate. And when it activates, it's gonna bubble and give like a nice lift to anything that you're cooking. So the temperature of your ingredients is actually very important for baking. It may seem a little bit like, roll your eyes, do they need to be room temperature? If you do have cold eggs that are straight out of the fridge, you forgot to take them out, no big deal. It only takes a few minutes for eggs to come to room temperature if they're submerged in water. Also, when you're cracking eggs, you should crack them on a flat surface, not on the side of a bowl or anything sharp. More often than not, this will ensure that less shell will get into your eggs. Butter is the most notorious baking ingredient that's really annoying if you forgot to bring it to room temperature. You can actually heat a glass bowl in a microwave and then turn that over on the butter, and that'll kind of slowly bring the temperature of the butter up. You still want to have like a good amount of structure. It'll be nice and smooth. I mean, everyone knows what it's like to get some nice room temperature butter on a knife, put that on some toast, like, my God, it's amazing. If your butter is too cold, it's just never really gonna blend all that well. All right, sugar. The easiest way to describe to someone the differences between white and brown sugar are probably with chocolate chip cookies. If you're using a lot of white sugar, the cookies will actually spread a lot more and become really crunchy. Whereas if you want kind of a chewier, thicker cookie, brown sugar is the way to go. It's got molasses in it, has a nice flavor. So that's an easy way to kind of tell the difference between white sugar and brown sugar. A lot of American recipes will have you measure in cups. The way that you're supposed to measure in cups is to spoon the ingredient into the cup itself. So it's kind of a nice light mixture, and then use the end of the spoon to level off the cup. Because cups are measured on volume, if you pack the flour in really tightly, then you'll get more flour than the recipe was intended for, which is why I actually prefer to use recipes that are weighted and just use a cheap kitchen scale to measure my ingredients. Either way, both should get you a good result. 1 cup of flour is about 125 grams. The nice thing here too is that you can kind of scoop a little bit out, make sure it's totally even, and you're getting a really accurate result every time. The next thing you want to do before you start baking is to prep your tin. I'm going to use a little knob of butter to rub all down the bottom as well as the sides of the pan. This is going to help brown the cake really nicely, and it's also going to help get the cake out when I'm done baking it. So take your parchment, fold it in half, then fold it in half again. Here we're going to work on one part, and that's going to be the part where all the folds meet. Fold the parchment in half on a diagonal, and then again one more time on a diagonal, kind of like a paper airplane. There you go. And I'm going to measure the parchment from the middle of the tin to the outside. And then when I unfold it, and it's going to be a perfect circle that's going to perfectly fit in my tin. The butter that I put in there before will help the parchment stick to the pan. And then I'm going to use the rest of that butter to rub on the parchment just to ensure that 1, I'm getting good color on the bottom of my cake, and 2, that the parchment will come off easily when I'm done baking. Voila! And I'm going to use a butter knife to go around and release the sides from the cake. Again, you want to use a butter knife, not something sharp, just so that we're not cutting into our tin. The best thing to do is actually go from side to side and kind of shake it like that. And then because of the way that we prepped our tin, the parchment should come right off, no problem. One of the most basic recipes for when you first start baking is a pound cake. And the cool thing about that is that it's equal parts of sugar, butter, and flour. And the other ingredients we're gonna need are some eggs, we're gonna use vanilla bean because we're fancy, and a bit of salt. Salt helps enhance the flavor of whatever you're doing. It helps sharpen the sweetness, if you will. All right, so first things first, we're going to cream the sugar and the butter together. Now, when people are baking for the first time and they see creaming the sugar and butter, they tend to just stop midway through. But you actually want to do this pretty thoroughly. butter and the sugar are going to be their own leavener in this way because we're increasing the volume and beating so much air into the butter, and it's going to help just give the butter more structure overall. As everyone knows, some of the batter will end up on the side of the bowl, so it's always a good idea to scrape down the bowl. So we're going to continue to go until we can feel the butter and there's barely any sugar granules in between your fingers. I'm just going to go a little bit more, and then one at a time I'm going to add the eggs. If you add the eggs too quickly, you can actually split the mixture a little bit because there's only so much moisture that the sugar and butter can absorb at once. When you see adding them gradually, that's why. So when you're done, it should be a really nice, light, fluffy, beautiful mixture. Everything's incorporated really evenly. It's all a very even color. Another thing you see a lot in recipes is sifting of dry ingredients. The reason why you want to do this is it helps evenly incorporate the dry ingredients into the wet ingredients. And it also ensures that if there's any kind of weird bits or large clumps, that it kind of takes care of those for you. Flour that's in so many of our baked goods and other things has gluten in it. So that's another reason to sift. In cakes, we want them to be really nice and light. So when you're folding in or you're mixing in the flour, it's going to be incorporated into the batter much quicker without developing too much gluten. Therefore having a nicer, more tender crumb. Our tin is already buttered with a little bit of flour on there as well to make sure that it's going to come out really easily. And then just quickly spread it all out to ensure it's going to be flat on the top. It's going into a preheated oven. Can't stress enough how much you need to preheat your oven. Never open the oven. You want to ensure that the cake is rising really beautifully. Every time you open the oven, it's going to slow down the process. So a quick glaze for this, just a bit of powdered sugar, a little bit of milk or cream. That's all you need. Powdered sugar needs a remarkably small amount of liquid in order to become an icing. For decorating, we can just do a few strips of parchment here to lay under the cake. Flip it over. And then you just pour that icing over your cake, and here are some sexy shots for you to look at, because nothing is prettier than sugar. That is so pretty. The pound cake doesn't have any chemical leaveners in it, so it's not going to be as airy as something like a sponge cake, but it's still really buttery and delicious. Oh, it's so good. Now on to something like brownies. Our tried and true tasty recipe uses melted butter for this one. So the melted butter and the sugar is going to be combined. It's not going to be light and fluffy like it was for the cake. We're just kind of combining the sugar and butter at this point. We're going to add an egg, another egg. So you're just going to kind of beat until it changes color like this. It's a little bit lighter, more of a batter. And then you're going to add that melted chocolate. You don't have to temper this mixture because we have so much sugar and butter in there. You're not as concerned about the hot chocolate and scrambling the eggs. And then next we're going to sift our dry ingredients. So I've got the flour, the salt, the baking soda, and the cocoa powder. We're using baking soda in this recipe because we're also using cocoa powder. So that's going to react with the baking soda and be the leavener that we need to have like these nice chewy brownies. Whenever you're folding, you kind of want to cut through the mixture and gently pull the bottom up to the top. And that's a really efficient way to mix dry ingredients into wet very carefully without developing too much gluten. So you want to cut down in the middle of the mixture, scrape the bottom, bring it up to the top, and continue that slowly until you get everything incorporated. Brownies are like really nice and scrumptious, but because they have that baking soda that is reacting to the acid, you don't want to let this sit out for too long. So you want to quickly get it into your dish, put a few chocolate chunks on top if you like, and then get this in the oven right away. And it's going to slightly rise and give you nice gooey brownies. And let's face it, it's delicious. Freshman year of baking, what you need to get through your first few recipes, starting with something easy like a pound cake or brownies, will build your confidence and let you take on something crazy. It's a good techniques and fundamentals that you can carry with you in pretty much any baking recipe that you encounter. If there's something that you struggle with in the kitchen, we'd love to do more tutorials on these. Tell us what you want to learn more of. Something to do with science just comes out a lot easier. Maybe physics? Maybe it has to do with physics, that's why it comes out easy. I don't know. Let's go with physics. Physics is why it comes out.
Let's go with physics.
I know a lot about science, that's why I'm so good at this. That was a joke, America, in the world.